Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite books of all time. I recently reread this book and it's fresh in my mind, so I thought, why not talk about how I would make this book into a movie? And that is none other than Beach Read by Emily Henry. And yes, I know this book is already set to be adapted into a film, but I want to talk about how I would make it into a film. And coming from a film background, my lifelong dream is to make books that I love into movies or TV shows, but do it the way that readers would want it. Do it like how I would want to see it. So I made a whole PowerPoint. I'm so excited. We're going to talk about the cast. We're going to talk about quotes and scenes that I think have to be in the film. And then we're going to talk about, unfortunately, the cuts that were made. So coming from a film background, not everything that is on page can be translated on screen. So I'm going to talk about the things that I think would be cut. And I'm so excited. So let me open up this PowerPoint and let's talk about Beach Read being adapted into a movie. Let's pull up my PowerPoint here. If I were to adapt Beach Read into a movie, we're gonna start off with our cast, and we start off with none other than Logan Lerman as Augustus Everett. And if Logan Lerman is not Gus, throw the movie away. I don't want it. I simply will riot if this man is not on my screen as Gus Everett, because he is so perfectly Gus. Like, it's insane. When I read Beach Read back in 2021, I pictured him, and then now in 2024, I still picture him. And he just has this kind of sad look about him, but he also has a face for rom-coms, and he definitely has a good film background. He has Percival Wallflower, Percy Jackson, and then his newest roles is Hunters, We Were the Lucky Ones. So he has a lot of serious roles, but there's also Stuck in Love. And I think he could definitely do really well in kind of a rom-com with this serious undertone. And he just, like, when you look at him, he gives the aesthetic of an author, of someone who would lock themselves in their house and write all day. Like, he just looks like that. And I don't know why he does to me, but he just fits Gus so well. And then next we have January Andrews. And ever since I saw someone mention this on TikTok, I cannot get her out of my head, because for the longest time, I was like, who is January in my mind? Daisy Edgar Jones. I love Daisy Edgar Jones. She's slowly become one of my favorite actresses, and she definitely has a great film background as well. I recently saw her in Twisters, so she has that little bit of rom-com chemistry as well. Like, her chemistry with Glenn Powell, so good, and I think her and Logan Lerman would also work really well together. She also has that serious background of Where the Crawdads Sing and Normal People. I think that she's just a really well-rounded actress, and she could really give January what she deserves, because January is a little awkward. She's struggling with her life, but she's also very sophisticated, and I feel like the look of Daisy Edgar Jones is perfect. Next, when I looked up Pete, I had a very specific aesthetic in mind. The actress that I picked, I'm not really sure. I've never seen her in anything, but I know that she's in House of Dragon. But this is the aesthetic that I was looking for. I was looking for short blonde hair. I was looking for a more rustic look to the face. So this is Sion, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, Brooke, but she just gives the look of Pete to me. And if it doesn't necessarily have to be her, but someone who kind of fits this image, I think would be perfect for the role of Pete. And a lot of people are saying Jane Lynch, and that, I find that so funny. That is not who I picture at all. Next is Maggie, which is Pete's partner. I can't remember if they're married or not, but when I picture Maggie, I think long blonde hair. She's spiritual. She's ethereal. I feel like I said that wrong, but she's got this kind of glamour-esque to her. And Lisa Kudrow, when I saw her, when I was looking up actresses, blonde hair in their 50s, and Lisa Kudrow popped up, I'm like, yes, this is Maggie. She looks so perfect for the role, and her background is Phoebe, with Phoebe has that spiritualness about her, and Lisa Kudrow also has the background in rom-com. I've seen her more recently in a lot of roles where she's the mother in these rom-coms, and she would be amazing as a geologist. Is it a geologist that Pete's wife is, Maggie is? She does something with rocks. I don't know the exact terminology, but I feel like Lisa Kudrow could really, really play that role well and do it justice. Next is Sonia. And when I pictured Sonia, like January's description of Sonia was long, voluminous, like gray hair. And I could not stop picturing Andie MacDowell. She was all that was in my head when I pictured Sonia, and specifically her with this gray hair. That is how I see Sonia, and she's also been in a lot of roles as a mom in rom-coms. She was in The Other Zoe. I also remember her from Ready or Not, which is like one of my favorite horror films ever. She just has this look. She has the look, you know? And I really like that. The next one is also, I'm gathering it based off of look, because when I think of Naomi, she's not a huge part. She is someone that doesn't have any lines, but when I picture her, this is kind of the look that she's giving to me, and that is Alexandria Daddario, because Gus describes Naomi as he could never get a read on her. He could never figure out what was going on in her brain, what she was thinking. And when I look at Alexandria, I'm like, girl, what's happening in that mind? So when I picture Naomi, I want someone who kind of looks like that, looks like I can't figure out what they're thinking. And to me, Alexandra does that. And I know that she is a bigger actress, so having no lines, I feel like I want to give it to someone who looks similar to her, but is not necessarily her, but it is the same, like aesthetics. Next, I created a whole little aesthetic board on what this book felt like and looked like in my brain. I took a lot of pictures, inspiration from Pinterest. I took some photos of quotes that I highlighted in my own personal copy of Beach Read, and this is what I was going for. This is how I felt it was in my mind, and this is kind of how it would relay in a film to me. Next, let's talk about our scenes. I have a lot of scenes. Beach Read means so much to me, so let's break these down. First scene that I definitely want to have is running into Gus at the bookstore or Pete's, and I want everyone to know January is a little awkward. I want her to be relatable in that sense, and I think to show kind of the dynamic between the two of them at first, you know, January sees Gus as her rival, kind of as her enemy. Like, that's how she thinks of Gus in her brain, and I want to show that with this interaction of them at the bookstore. Next is the book club, because obviously we need January to see Sonia. She needs to see her dad's mistress, but I also want to include the purse wine, because the purse wine is so funny to me. And when you come up with main characters, you need them to have flaws, but you also need them to be relatable. And I feel like as a woman, we've all been at a party where you don't know anyone, it's extremely awkward, someone walks in that like you're not a fan of, and you need that distraction, so you're like drinking something, and that's where the purse wine comes in. I don't know, I think it's funny, and it adds that lightheartedness to like the seriousness of what's going on. So of course the bet, because that's what this book is. This book is a lot of things, but it has a lot to do with the bet. So January and Gus make this bet that January is going to write more of a sad literary fiction book that Gus typically writes. And then Gus is going to write a rom-com romantic novel that January typically writes. So they decide to see whose would sell better and things like that. And every week they go on little dates to do research for their books. So some of them are like rom-com dates, and some of them are like the more serious dates that Gus takes January on. So this definitely needs to be in the book. Notes through the windows. 1, I think the book lovers like who read this would eat it up. 2, I think any moviegoer, anyone who is a rom-com fanatic would also love this. I can already see like the TikTok edits, okay? And obviously it's giving Taylor Swift You Belong With Me video. I think it's fun, I think it's quirky, and I need to see it happen. Line dancing. If there's one thing I remembered about this book from 2021, it's the line dancing. I was reading it and I got to their first date, and I was like, where is the cowboy? Like, the cowboy dancing at this bar. And I think if that's something that resonated with me and something that I remember, that I definitely want to put that in the film. And also you have that rom-com typical scene laid out with the line dancing and things like that. But then you get out of that bar and you have that more serious talk at the car, which I think it's important. Again, emotional conversation about January's ex, mention of overwhelmed when you sleep, come back at Gus's end with his monologue. This, like, beach read will not be beach read without when I watch you sleep, I feel overwhelmed you exist. If that is not in the movie, again, throw it away. We don't want it. Absolutely canceled. Because that is one of my favorite quotes of all time. Because you really know, like, if you really think about it, you know you love someone when you wake up in the middle of the night, you look over and you're like, oh my gosh, like, I'm just so overwhelmed that you exist. So if this is not in the movie, we need a redo. But again, I think we need to have that emotional conversation about Jacques and the emotional conversation about Gus's ex-wife, Naomi, because in the book, obviously you're in that inner monologue of January, but in a movie, you can't really portray what a character is thinking. So to have this conversation between the two of them about their exes will really help someone who has not read the book understand what each of them are going through and what they went through. Next is interview with Dave from the cult. I think it's very important to include one of the interviews, and to me, Dave is more important. And I don't think we need to have, you know, the interview with Dave and his mom, or maybe just like Dave includes all of this in one sitting, because obviously the movie's only 2 hours. We got to cut some things out. But I do think it's still important to include the cult because that is one of the serious underlines of the book. And I feel like without the cult, like, you're just having purely a rom-com movie. And beach read is not anything without, like, the cult. I feel like it's such a major part of the book. I would be very, very upset if we didn't have the cult mentioned or these interviews in the book. Next, we have the drive-in. I love the drive-in scene because in any rom-com, there's like that part where the tension is so heavy and then it like snaps and they end up like kissing or something, and then something comes along and ruins it, like someone gets a phone call or things like that. In this case, security comes up and is like, this is a PG place, like, you can't be doing this, you gotta leave. So I just think it's funny. I think like a lot of people can relate to it because drive-ins are a pretty common thing where people like mess around, and that's that idea everyone has when they go into a movie, like that's how they perceive drive-ins. So I think it would be fun to include this scene. And then January and Gus in January's basement. This is where everything breaks and like they give in to their temptations, and I think that's important to include. But I also want to do the 4th of July party. It's going to be brief, but we also have to get into the part where Gus thinks he's not good enough for January and kind of starts to pull back, and that starts at the 4th of July party. And then January and Gus at New Eden, where the cult was, you know, he's still pulling back from her and she feels like he doesn't want her anymore, and then they discuss it in the tent scene, and that's when they really kind of get together and they're like, yeah, we're gonna do this, we're gonna work together. And then we have the bookstore event, and this is where everything crashes and burns. And Gus sees his ex-wife. January recognizes her for who she is, but I don't want Naomi to have any lines. Like, I want it to kind of flash forward. The book event is over and January sees Naomi and Gus speaking, you know, in the corner, very hush hush. And then January kind of has this crisis. And this is where her character development really comes in. She goes home, she sees Sonia on her porch, and Sonia's like, you haven't read all the letters from your dad? And then we have that emotional scene with January and the letters, and she gets this new perspective on her dad and his life, but also she changes her perspective on her life based on these letters. And how I want to start the movie is January's in her car and she's holding the letter from her dad that she refuses to open. And then lastly, January and Gus, they make up, they dance in the rain, and he says that Naomi wants to be with him, but he wants to be with January. I love it. So going off of that, we have our quotes. The very first one I have that has to be included is when they make the bet. Gus says, just one more thing. January says, what? And he goes, promise not to fall in love with me. This is something I underlined when I first got into reading back in 2021. It's something I underlined and it really resonated with me. I highlighted it and it's still one of my favorite quotes from this book. And then I have my copy with me right here because Some of the quotes are long, so I just put page numbers. So let me flip to the very first one I underlined. Page 186. This is about like one of the scenes where they hold up the signs so they can read it from each other's windows. This is about the like line dancing date. So Gus is like, tux tonight? And she's like, oh, definitely. And he goes, seriously? She's like, no, do you have cowboy boots? I think that would be super cute to include. And then they go straight into the line dancing scene. Could be super fun. And then again, this is also kind of around the line dancing scene. Gus says, you honestly have to write me into your will for this. I think it's so funny. I don't know. It's so Gus. If you've read it and then you read it again, you just like understand the character so perfectly. And I love them. I love their banter. Next is page 239. So 239 is when they're about to go to the 4th of July party. So January says, I'll come, but I'm definitely bringing up rocks to Maggie. And then Gus says, you're sick and twisted, January Andrews. That's what I love about you. Oh, that's what it is? Well, he said, one thing, it seemed too crass to invite you to my aunt's house and then bring up your ass. I think that would just go over so well with the rom-com audience. And I don't know, when I read that, I literally wrote in my book screaming. Like, I was screaming, kicking my feet, giggling. Like, I love them. And again, I think it would just go really well with a rom-com audience who haven't read the book. Like, they would eat that line up for sure. Next is 284. And on 284, he says, I want you in every way. I want to take you on dates and play with a fucking beach ball in a pool with you, but I'm a wreck, January. I don't want to hurt you, and I don't want to feel what it would be to lose you. And I think that's where they kind of have their fallout. And that's where Gus kind of realizes that he might not be enough for January. And one of the scenes in the 4th of July, like, scene in the book, she's in the pool and Gus like refuses to get in the pool. So I think having that brief kind of fallout at the 4th of July party and bringing it back in and incorporating this quote by Gus would really be good for the film. And then next is 294. And 294 is a little monologue by January that I just think is really beautiful, and it shows the more depth of the film and it gives you a new perspective about life. And she says, I spent all last summer thinking I'd never be happy again, and now, a year later, I still feel sick and worried and angry, but at moments I'm also happy. Bad things don't dig down through your life until the pit's so deep that nothing good will ever be big enough to make you happy again. No matter how much shit, there'll always be wildflowers. There'll always be Pete's and Maggie's and rainstorms and forests and sun on waves. I don't know, I think that's so beautiful, and I don't know where I would incorporate it. I don't know if it's like something that I would close the movie out with, but I love the, like, specifically there'll always be wildflowers, there'll always be Pete's and Maggie's and rainstorms and forests and suns on rain. Or sun on waves. I think it's just such a beautiful quote. And then lastly, the quotes that I want to include is page 346 to 47, which is Gus's in monologue where he kind of confesses his full feelings for January. He says, I've never met someone who is so perfectly my favorite person. That absolutely needs to be in the film. I'm gonna, like, in my brain, I'm like, the amount of edits that someone will make if Logan Lerman says that line. Also, I want to do the line where it says, because I know no matter how long I get to love you, it will be worth whatever comes after. And of course, my favorite line ever to exist, and if it's not in the film, throw the film away. When I watch you sleep, he said shakily, I feel overwhelmed that you exist. And lastly, we're going to talk about, unfortunately, this would not make the cut, and that's Shaddy. So I love the character, and I love her importance and her one-liners in the book, but coming from someone who has a film background, I feel like she would be cut from the film, mainly because there's too much communication via text. She's not there presently, like physically, so I don't think that she would be like a paid major role. I think that she would be cut from the film altogether, simply because she's not adding anything by just getting the text messages and the phone calls. But I love the end of the book where she's like, if Gus turns me down, she'll be there for me, and that's enough. But I don't think that she's fitting the budget, unfortunately. And then I would also cut out the 9 months later. That's the final chapter of the book. It's essentially like an epilogue, but I would have it end where they make up and like they dance in the rain. I think I would have to cut out the carnival date, because when it comes down to the rom-com dates, and if we have to cut one because obviously it's only a 2-hour film, I'm cutting the carnival date because the things that are more memorable to me are the drive-in and the line dancing. Next is Olive Garden. There's a whole scene where they meet Dave from the New Eden cult and he doesn't show up. It's super cute, but I also think it's unnecessary in the film. And also, like I said earlier, I think we just need to have one interview with someone from the cult, whether it's the interview with Dave and his mom together or if it's just Dave by himself. I think obviously that would be written differently into the script from the book, but it would be essentially the same, but it would just be, you know, written into one sitting instead of different interviews with different people. He doesn't show up, one with just him and then one with his mother. I think it would just be condensed to one sole interview with Dave. And then lastly, January and Gus in college. I feel like maybe we'd want some flashbacks, but I think the more focus on this is their relationship, and we can tell that through mention combos between the two of them or people around them versus including flashbacks from their college days. I think we can just talk about, you know, when Gus says like, I always wanted you in college, and you know, January's like, what do you mean? Or when January's like, you think of me as this fairy princess. And I think it would be more relevant for them to discuss it versus like showing flashbacks. Again, it's just January's monologue, and I think it would be better shown on the movie if they just talked about it. And then I actually do have one more slide. So this is if Shadi makes the cut. It would be Amina Suman. I love Amina Suman, and I'm still very upset that they canceled the Six of Crows reboot and canceled, why can't I think of the name? All I care about is Six of Crows. Shadow and Bone, thank you. They canceled Shadow and Bone. Thank you all so much for listening to me yap about Beach Read. Like, that is one of my favorite books of all time. So if I could talk about Beach Read for hours, I would. But we did condense it just a little bit for this video, but this video was so fun. And I did do another book adaptations video on the Love Hypothesis, but I formatted this one a little differently. So if you have any tips or if you liked how this was, please let me know in the comments below. This is something I really want to do with my life. I want to make books into movies. So let me know if you agree with the cast, if you think I missed anything that absolutely needs to be in the film, or if you agree, or if you disagree. I want to know it all in the comments below. But anyway, this was so fun, and I can't wait to yap with you about books in the future. So I will see you all in my next video.